You take a seed, you plant it, you grow it, you dry it, you roll it, you smoke it, and it goes down smooth. Hey!
Spanning the globe to bring you the latest developments in medical cannabis, adult marijuana, industrial hemp, and spiritual ganja. It's time for the Marijuana Agenda with Russ Belville. Now, here's your host, Russ Belville.
Good day, tokers and tokettes and non-toking lovers of liberty. It is Monday, July 31st, 2017, and it's got to be 420 somewhere in the world. Welcome to the program. We are so glad to have you here today for the start of another week of what's sure to be a turbulent week in politics. My goodness, we just barely got used to the mooch. And now he's out of there. That was an amazing thing, man. We had Sean Spicer leave because Scaramucci came in, and then they got rid of the Scaramucci gets rid of Reince Priebus, and in favor of Reince Priebus, they bring in General Kelly, and then General Kelly gets rid of Scaramucci. Like, my goodness, there's more drama than a high school dance going on here in the White House. We'll talk a little bit about that in our cannabis headline news and give you a look at the new chief of staff, John Kelly, and what his thoughts are about marijuana and the war on drugs. Also, talk in Washington about having Jeff Sessions move over to take Kelly's place at Homeland Security and then open up a possible recess appointment for Attorney General by Donald Trump, where he wouldn't have to get the approval of Congress, which the Senate, of course, is pretty upset at the way Trump has been treating their former colleague, Jeff Sessions. So it is a whole bunch of drama. We'll get into that in the news. Also on the program today, we have Americans for Safe Access joining us with the patient-focused update. David Mangone, their senior legislative analyst, will be joining us to talk about the progress on recent federal bills to protect medical marijuana patients, as well as to address the banking and taxation issues with marijuana in this country. And then at the end of the show, oh my goodness, we have time for a blistering radical rant today. I was jolted awake by a report coming out of the Daily Mail in the UK about a Tennessee teenager who had been busted for, among other charges, possession with intent to deliver, and for 3 hours was tied down and tasered by 3 cops in Tennessee on video. We've got that video for you today in the Radical Rant with the horrifying audio as well. So stay tuned at the end of this half hour for that. But right now, we've got to get to the cannabis headline news brought to you by MarijuanaMoment.net.
This is your cannabis headline news, brought to you by MarijuanaMoment.net. The complete source for all your marijuana news in one morning newsletter from marijuana majority founder Tom Angel. Subscribe today for free at marijuanamoment.net.
This is your cannabis headline news for Monday, July 31st, 2017. I'm Russ Belville. Reince Priebus is out as White House Chief of Staff, replaced by former Homeland Security Secretary John Kelly. Marijuana Moment notes that Kelly has called marijuana, quote, a gateway drug, end quote, but also said it, quote, does have its uses in the medical world, end quote, and once claimed it is, quote, not a factor, end quote, in the drug war, and that solving the nation's drug problem does not involve, quote, arresting a lot of users, end quote. On NBC's Meet the Press, Kelly said, quote, the solution is a comprehensive drug demand reduction program in the United States that involves every man and woman of goodwill, and then rehabilitation, and then law enforcement, and then getting at the poppy fields and the coca fields in the South, end quote. A report in BuzzFeed claims some senior White House staff are discussing a scenario under which U.S. Attorney General Jeff Sessions would replace John Kelly as Homeland Security Secretary, leaving a vacancy for the president to fill at the Justice Department. On Friday, Representative James Comer, Republican of Kentucky, introduced H.R. 3530, a new version of the Industrial Hemp Farming Act, along with 15 co-sponsors. The bill gained support from Judiciary Chair Goodlatte, a Republican of Virginia, and has several new provisions. Included in the new bill is the inclusion of Native American tribes in its coverage, and a provision which will allow for research on hemp with THC levels of up to 0.6% THC. However, industrial hemp advocates are concerned about provisions that allow DEA to conduct, quote, administrative inspections, end quote, of locations where there is, quote, production, storage, distribution, or use of hemp, end quote. The bill also limits the extraction and processing of hemp oil that has, quote, been altered so as to increase the delta-9 tetrahydrocannabinol concentration above the limits specified, end quote. That would be 0.3% THC. That provision, along with a provision preventing products made from hemp from contravening the Food, Drug, and Cosmetic Act, is intended to torpedo the growing prevalence of so-called hemp-derived CBD oil. A mayor in the Philippines who had been accused of drug trafficking by President Rodrigo Duterte was killed in Sunday morning raids by police that killed his wife and 10 others, according to the New York Times. Philippine National Police claim they took gunfire from the mayor's security personnel when they arrived at the mayor's home to arrest him and 3 members of his family. Police say they confiscated rifles, cash, and methamphetamines at the mayor's home. The raids came a few days after the president's annual speech to the Philippine Congress, where he vowed to continue his bloody crackdown that has resulted in the extrajudicial killings of over 8,000 Philippines. This is the 3rd Philippine mayor to have been killed by police. One had been killed at a checkpoint by police, who claimed his guards fired at them. Another was killed in his jail cell by police. The opponents of marijuana legalization are becoming increasingly desperate in their attempts to dismiss the positive results coming in from the states that have legalized. Conservative firebrand Ann Coulter, in a debate at Politicon this weekend, argued against widely acknowledged racial disparities in marijuana enforcement by claiming that research shows African Americans are more likely to lie about their use on surveys. She also said cannabis consumption, quote, makes people retarded, end quote. Meanwhile, the so-called quarterback of the anti-legalization movement, Project Sam founder Kevin Sabet, has an op-ed in the Las Vegas Review-Journal claiming that, quote, in every state where it has been tried, legalization's costs outweigh any financial benefits, end quote. So far, those financial benefits are well over $400 million in Washington state tax revenue, over $500 million in Colorado, and over $75 million in Oregon, meaning marijuana taxes in America are, by now, likely over $1 billion. Massachusetts medical marijuana law is unconstitutionally vague and endangers the rights of patients who grow their own cannabis, according to a case the state Supreme Judicial Court has agreed to hear. Some medical marijuana patients can grow enough pot for a 60-day supply under vague state rules that do not denote exactly how many plants a patient can grow, leaving the police and the court system to guess at patients' intentions. The case before the court argues the regulations of the medical marijuana law are unconstitutionally vague. This has been your Cannabis Headline News for Monday, July 31st, 2017. I'm Russ Belville.
You're listening to the Marijuana Agenda with Russ Belville.
Looking for the 420 friendliest way to visit beautiful legal Potland, Oregon?
I'm Lori Duckworth, inviting you to come stay with us at Delta 9 House and Studios.
You get your own private room with queen bed and access to our high-speed Wi-Fi, premium entertainment system, and more.
We'll even cook you breakfast. Look us up on Facebook at Delta 9 House.
That's facebook.com/Delta9House. Delta 9 House is booked through Airbnb.com. City of Portland permit number 17-159855.
The Marijuana Agenda. Like the pharmaceutical agenda, without all the side effects, overdose deaths, insurance.
Side effects may include nausea, dry mouth, and constipation. Dry mouth, constipation, indigestion, and abdominal pain,
which can occur without warning and may cause death.
If you work in the cannabis industry, consume marijuana, or just support freedom, you need to know about breaking policy news that affects you. Marijuana Moment is the daily newsletter that helps you stay on top of all the latest and most important state, federal, and international cannabis developments. Brought to you by longtime legalization activist Tom Angel, Marijuana Moment puts a concise yet comprehensive overview of cannabis news in your inbox early every weekday morning. Wake up to Marijuana Moment and rest assured you'll be ready for the cannabis news that's driving the day. Subscribe now at marijuanamoment.net. Welcome to ACE's Patient-Focused Update. Almost every U.S. state now recognizes some form of cannabis as medicine. But since 1971, the federal government has steadfastly denied the medical benefits of herbal cannabis. Americans for Safe Access is the nation's leading organization fighting for the rights of all patients who use cannabis as medicine. Join us now for another edition of ACE's Patient-Focused Update. Welcome, everyone, to another episode of ACE's Patient-Focused Update, the podcast for Americans for Safe Access. I'm Russ Belville. Joining us today on the podcast, we have legislative analyst from Americans for Safe Access, David Mangone. David, welcome to the program.
Hey, thanks for having me.
We are so glad to have you on the program today because it's just been a flurry of activity in the federal Congress with respect to reforming our nation's marijuana laws, particularly those concerning states that have passed protections for patients that are using cannabis in accordance with their state laws. Could you give us an update on what those bills are and what the progress has been?
Sure. Like you said, last week was a really big week, especially on the Senate side. The Senate Appropriations Committee approved an amendment that protects state medical cannabis laws from federal interference by the Department of Justice. This has been come to known as the CJS Amendment, the text of Rohrabacher-Farr, Rohrabacher-Blumenauer in its different iterations. But it was introduced by Mr. Patrick Leahy from Vermont. And he really wanted to focus on using Justice Department resources in an efficient manner, an appropriate manner, and not going after patients who are complying with state law under their medical cannabis programs.
So these bills have, in the past, gotten through and passed with some bipartisan support and protected our medical cannabis patients in these states. Are we going to see these be picked up again? Does the prognosis look good?
Well, I'll say something that's really notable about this iteration is that it passed by a voice vote, which means no one had strong enough opposition to demand that each senator cast a vote, either yay or nay. So usually when things pass by voice vote in committees, it usually indicates a pretty strong sense of bipartisan support. And Mr. Rohrabacher and Mr. Blumenauer have already indicated that they plan on introducing this amendment on the floor once the House comes back from their August recess. And based on the vote counts of years past, it's passed in a pretty significant majority in the House when it's been up for a vote. So I'm confident that this will continue to be incorporated in the annual budget process, despite protests from, I think, the current Attorney General and perhaps the administration as well.
Well, I'm glad you brought up Jeff Sessions, the current Attorney General. There's some whispers in Washington about him being transferred to Homeland Security now that General Kelly has been appointed to Chief of Staff from that position. Do you have any indication one way or another if the Attorney General is going anywhere? And if not, could he be a roadblock in getting some of these reforms passed?
Well, I think I'll answer those questions in reverse order. As far as him being a roadblock, Congress has very much expressed their willingness to, not necessarily subvert him, but act in contradiction to his wishes about cannabis. He had issued a letter earlier this spring asking the budget to not include protections for medical cannabis. And 5 days later, the House ended up passing an appropriations bill that was signed by the president that continued these protections through September 30th. So I don't think necessarily his policy positions are really going to impact what the folks on Capitol Hill are planning on doing or going to continue to do. And then as for the first part, as for movement, it's always difficult to predict things like that. Obviously, with John Kelly leaving Homeland Security, that will be a vacant position. But the question remains of who, if indeed Jeff Sessions moved over there, who would replace him? And I think from a patient advocate standpoint, at least it has seemed so far, not many people could be worse on policy positions for medical cannabis than Attorney General Sessions, but I wouldn't want to invite that invitation to put someone in that role who might have a harder line on drug policy.
That's probably a wise choice. There are so many other issues that impact the world of medical cannabis in the states that have passed these laws and are trying to operate dispensaries and licensed growers. So besides Rohrabacher-Blumenauer protecting the states from DOJ interference, we have the problems of banking and taxation and so forth. Is there any progress on those fronts?
Sure. The banking bill that has been floating around the House and the Senate actually just crossed over 51 co-sponsors this morning. There's a tremendous amount of support to have this industry be regulated like any other industry, have access to legitimate financing and legitimate banking. And I think even for representatives and senators who aren't necessarily on board with creating medical cannabis programs or adult use programs, that they're still very much interested in seeing how this could be a regulated industry. And obviously a key component of a regulated industry comes from banking services. And we had the other day the Secretary of the Treasury acknowledge that there is significant challenges with the cannabis industry when it comes to banking. And he said as a former banker, it's something that he had worked on and was aware of. And I think that the Treasury and the IRS are looking at ways to create guidance for this industry that doesn't necessarily come in the form of a crackdown, but provides good rules and regulations that we saw developed in other areas of commerce.
Is there any thought of moving on the taxation issue, the so-called IRS 280E penalties?
I think you'll see some more information about that when the GOP tax plan is unveiled this fall. I think that tax plan will provide a good opportunity, if not necessarily in the plan itself, a good opportunity for individuals to provide amendments to that tax plan and move from there. It's been primarily focused on healthcare, as I'm sure you know, these past couple of weeks. So the windows for any sort of tax reform have been limited. But I think with the unveiling of this plan in the fall, you're going to see some movement on taxation issues, especially with 280E.
How about the efforts to get to the root of the issue, and that is cannabis being scheduled in the most restrictive category, Schedule 1, the category deeming it to have no medically recognized use in the United States? I know there are numerous bills as far as rescheduling cannabis, perhaps other bills having to do with simply cannabidiol and unscheduling that. Do we have any progress to report on those?
Well, there's an interesting development last week as well. Trey Gowdy from South Carolina asked in an oversight hearing of the Office of National Drug Control Policy about the process of scheduling and asked the National Institute of Drug Abuse to take a hard look at how cannabis is scheduled and why it's scheduled the reason it is. There's a couple different pathways that this can move forward with, and one, of course, is through Congress, where they change the wording of the Controlled Substances Act or move, as it's defined in the Act, marijuana to another schedule or remove it from the schedule entirely. But there's also the option of going through the administrative process with the Food and Drug Administration and Health and Human Services. So it's unclear how that will move forward, but when you have someone like Trey Gowdy from a very conservative district in South Carolina asking those questions to the oversight agencies for drug regulation, I think people are certainly thinking about it and thinking about creative ways how to address the scheduling issue.
Well, we'll keep our eye on those issues and all of these bills in future episodes of the program. And David Mangone, legislative analyst for Americans for Safe Access. Before we let you go, what can our listeners do to help you guys out in your efforts to get these reforms passed through Congress?
Well, we're coming up on the August recess where all of the legislators are going home to their districts to be closer to their constituents, more accessible. And we would really ask that attend town halls, go to parades where they might be at, and make sure that they know that there's a lot of support for these issues. And it's a great opportunity to be, close by and get a lot of face time you might necessarily not get with your representatives and your senators being in D.C. So while they're home, just make sure you make your voice heard and make sure your passion is echoed with all your friends and your family, and make sure that these lawmakers know where you stand.
For more information on these and other issues, make sure you check out the Americans for Safe Access webpage at safeaccessnow.org. And David Mangone, legislative analyst for ASA, thanks so much for joining us here today on the ASA's Patient-Focused Update.
Thanks so much, Russ.
This episode was produced as part of the Marijuana Agenda with Russ Belville, the daily news and interview podcast covering the world of medical cannabis, adult marijuana, industrial hemp, and spiritual ganja. MJAgenda.com.
Hi, I'm Russ Belville from the Marijuana Agenda. If you're a cannabis brand looking to build trust and awareness within the community, consider becoming a sponsor of this program. Your message will be seen and heard by the most dedicated followers of marijuana policy reform, who are loyal and supportive of those brands that give back to the community. Just log on to mjagenda.com and click the Become a Patron button to learn how your brand can also be featured in my live nationwide appearances. Thank you for your support.
The Marijuana Agenda, like the conservative agenda, minus the hypocrisy.
The Marijuana Agenda with Russ Belville is proudly sponsored by the Marijuana Business Association. The MJBA, called by NBC News the Cannabis Chamber of Commerce, is the fastest growing business association and the fastest growing industry in America. I've been working with the MJBA for years, and I personally invite you to join the MJBA. MJBA also publishes the popular MJ Headline News on Facebook and the MJNewsNetwork.com and Marijuana Channel 1 on YouTube. Visit mjba.net for more details.
Total war against public enemy number one.
10 federal criminal penalties for 1 ounce of marijuana.
Marijuana is probably the most dangerous drug.
Legalization is just another word for surrender.
I experimented with marijuana and didn't inhale.
This is not medicine. This is a Cheech and Chong show.
Encourage people to use less drugs.
I am ill.
That was the point.
I think it would be a mistake to legalize.
Negative reports coming out of Colorado.
People don't smoke marijuana.
Did you see that video from last week with the 45th occupant of the White House? I can't call him president anymore. Donald Trump, who was speaking in front of a group of assembled police officers in Suffolk County, New York. And there's a big controversy because Donald Trump was talking to these cops and joking about them getting rougher with suspects, actually endorsing police brutality, which the cops laughed and applauded for. The actual quote was this from Trump. "Now, we're getting them out anyway, but we'd like to get them out a lot faster. And when you see these towns, when you see these thugs being thrown into the back of a paddy wagon, you just see them thrown in rough. I said, please don't be too nice. Like when you guys put somebody in the car and you're protecting their head, you know, the way you put their hand over, like don't hit their head and they've just killed somebody, don't hit their head. I said, you can take the hand away, okay?" End quote. Trump even says that we're going to, quote, "support our police like our police have never been supported before because the laws are stacked against us, but we're ending that." End quote. The laws are stacked against the police, he says. Tell that to the families of every unarmed person who has been killed by the police, even on video, who then see the killer given paid leave, never indicted, or eventually acquitted. Now, notable police departments and organizations are rebuking Trump on his call for increased police brutality, because in America, we've got all the police brutality we need. We have over 700 individuals who've been killed by police so far this year. For comparison's sake, Canada averages 25 police killings a year. Germany had 15 police killings in 2 years. Australia had 94 police killings in 19 years. England and Wales have had 55 police killings in 24 years, and in the nation of Iceland, they've had 1 police killing in all of its 73 years of existence as a country. Here in America, for the last decade or so, we have averaged over 3 deaths per day at the hands of police. And it's frustrating to tell this story of Trump saying, please don't be too nice. Bad enough that he stole a Jerry Seinfeld joke, by the way. The old joke about, put in the hand after you catch the killer and put the hand to make sure he doesn't get hurt. That's an old Seinfeld joke from the 90s. So Trump's a joke thief as well. And to say that the laws are stacked against the cops is just offensive, and a perfect example of this, a perfect example of how our cops are not so nice, of how some of our cops have a more sadistic disregard for humanity, comes to us today by way of the Daily Mail in the UK, a story out of Cheatham County, Tennessee. The police had arrested this 18-year-old named Jordan Elias Norris for alleged felony manufacturing or possession of marijuana for resale, possession of drug paraphernalia, theft under $500, and 5 counts of possession of a prohibited weapon, vandalism of over $1,000, and simple assault. Now, the prohibited weapon, he had a semi-automatic rifle. The simple assault was him getting in a fight in jail. The vandalism, again, just typical kind of minor crimes. But the main crime, felony, possession of marijuana for resale. Now, keep in mind that Jordan is innocent until proven guilty in a court of law, and that in Tennessee, a felony for possession of marijuana for resale can be as little as 1/2 ounce of marijuana. And that manufacturing felonies in Tennessee begin at just 1 cannabis plant. 1, that's felony. So, while 18-year-old Jordan was incarcerated, the cops thought he was going to get into a jail fight. So, they tasered him. And then he wouldn't cooperate as the officers tried to cuff him, so they tasered him. And then the officers strapped Jordan into a restraint chair, which he resisted, so they tasered him. Now, at this point, we take you to the camera inside the jail in Cheatham County, Tennessee. It's an overhead shot where you'll see one police officer who is administering a taser to the seated and bound Jordan, the 18-year-old. Another police officer behind him holding a cloth over his chin and mouth so he doesn't bite his tongue off or choke. And a third officer restraining his arms and legs, which again, remember, are tied down in this restraint chair.
Would you like to comply now? Would you like to comply now? No, you won't. You will not.
That's the sound of the taser. Jordan is thrashing, wincing in pain.
Good. Are you down here?
Another application of the taser.
Stop resisting.
I keep telling him to stop resisting, but remember, he's tied down in a chair. And 3 enormous cops are holding him down.
No, just stop. You don't like it, do you? Stop resisting.
It sucks. You don't like it, do you? Stop resisting. That is the video of a man being tasered over the span of 3 hours he spent in that chair, being tasered by the police who kept telling him, stop resisting, and I'll do this until I run out of batteries. The cop said he would do it until he ran out of batteries. For a teenager who was caught with what they called an amount of marijuana he intended to sell. And then, as I posted this video, I have Trump supporters on my YouTube page saying, well, he was talking about going after the MS-13 gang, not teenage weed dealers. Hey, if this is how the cops are when they're too nice, what do you think they're going to be like when the cameras are off and Trump tells them to get rough?
Follow MJ Agenda on Facebook, Pinterest, Instagram, YouTube, and follow MJ Agenda Show on Twitter. Learn more at mjagenda.com.
That's all the time we got for today. Thanks for joining us. From everyone here at Delta 9 House and Studios, I'm Radical Russ. Until next time, take care of each other, tokers.
You take a seed, you plant it, you grow it, you dry it.